In an age of glittering mansions, diamond tiaras and transatlantic marriages, the heiresses of the Gilded Age dazzled the world with their wealth and beauty. But behind the opulent facades and society headlines lay far more compelling stories, tales of rebellion, resilience, and reinvention. These women were born into privilege, yet many found themselves constrained by expectations as rigid as the corsets they wore. Some played the roles assigned to them with grace, while others shattered them entirely, stepping beyond the ballroom to shape history, champion reform, and redefine what it meant to be powerful in a world that often denied them agency. Their lives, rich in contradiction, remain deeply relevant today, raising timeless questions about wealth, influence, and the true meaning of legacy. The Gilded Age, spanning from the 1870s to the early 1900s, marked a defining chapter in American history, often described as a time of both unparalleled economic growth and deep social disparity. The name Gilded Age itself, coined by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner in their satirical novel The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, suggests a thin layer of gold covering underlying problems. This metaphor reflects the age's essence. Beneath the surface of glittering mansions, booming railroads, and towering fortunes lay corruption, inequality, and systemic challenges. As industrialization reshaped the American economy, cities grew at an astonishing pace, technological advancements revolutionized everyday life, and financial empires emerged seemingly overnight. It was a time of both boundless opportunity and excessive indulgence, a paradox of riches and ruin that defined a generation. Central to this period was the meteoric rise of new money families, individuals, and dynasties who amassed unprecedented wealth through emerging industries such as oil, steel, railroads, and finance. Among the most prominent of these were the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Astors. Unlike the old money aristocracy of Europe and a few established American families rooted in colonial fortunes, these entrepreneurs were self-made men who leveraged the capitalist potential of the age to accumulate enormous personal wealth. John D. Rockefeller, for example, revolutionized the petroleum industry through Standard Oil, creating a near monopoly and setting the template for modern corporate organization. Cornelius Vanderbilt built a fortune through shipping and railroads, expanding his influence far beyond the docks and stations where he began. Meanwhile, the Astor family, initially rooted in the fur trade, expanded their wealth into real estate and finance, exemplifying how capital could be leveraged across industries for continued accumulation. The emergence of these industrial barons and their lavish lifestyles signaled a shift in American society. Massive mansions on Fifth Avenue, sprawling estates in Newport, and art collections rivaling European royalty became the physical manifestations of this new wealth. These displays were not merely about personal comfort, they were performances of power and cultural legitimacy. Social events, philanthropic endowments, and intermarriage with European nobility were all part of the strategy to cement a family's place in high society. The elite's sense of exclusivity was often enforced through social codes and institutions like private clubs and exclusive debutante balls, reinforcing class distinctions in a supposedly egalitarian nation. However, the wealth of the Gilded Age was not evenly distributed. For every millionaire magnate, there were thousands of laborers working long hours in dangerous conditions for meager wages. The same railroads that enabled economic expansion also displaced communities and were built on the backs of underpaid immigrant workers. Labor unrest, strikes, and protests frequently disrupted the industrial order. Events like the Haymarket Riot and the Pullman Strike highlighted the tensions between capital and labor, drawing attention to the darker side of economic expansion. Yet, for the elite, these problems were often out of sight or dismissed as necessary side effects of progress. Many justified their success through the doctrine of social Darwinism, arguing that their wealth was a natural result of superiority in ambition and intellect. As these fortunes grew, so too did questions about their permanence and succession. Inheritance became a central issue for many families, intertwining legal, financial, and personal concerns. The vast amounts of money involved introduced a new complexity to family dynamics. Trust funds became a common mechanism to manage the transfer of wealth, both to protect the fortune from heirs perceived as irresponsible and to shield it from taxation or legal claims. Wealth was no longer simply handed over, it was managed and controlled, often by intricate legal structures and financial advisors. These trusts frequently came with strings attached, dictating how and when heirs could access their inheritance, and sometimes even influencing personal decisions like whom to marry or where to live. Legal battles over inheritance were not uncommon and often played out publicly, offering the masses a glimpse into the internal conflicts of the elite. Disputes over wills, contested trusts, and accusations of undue influence turned family affairs into courtroom dramas. These conflicts were driven not only by greed but by deeply entrenched expectations about social roles, familial duty, and legacy. For instance, the idea that a male heir should inherit the bulk of the estate persisted well into the 20th century, sidelining daughters and reinforcing patriarchal norms. In other cases, sudden deaths or ambiguous wills could pit siblings against one another, fracturing families that had once presented a unified public image. Beyond the legal and financial aspects, inheritance also carried significant social expectations. Heirs to Gilded Age fortunes were not only expected to maintain the family's wealth but also its reputation. This meant upholding appearances, engaging in philanthropy, and participating in elite social circles. Failure to do so could tarnish the family name, reducing social capital even if the financial capital remained intact. Many second-generation heirs struggled with the burden of legacy, caught between the opulence of their upbringing and the pressures to live up to a parent's achievements. This tension often manifested in personal crises, including substance abuse, scandalous relationships, or alienation from family. At the same time, there was a growing movement toward philanthropy and the idea of noblesse oblige, that the wealthy had a moral responsibility to use their resources for the public good. This ethos, championed by figures like Andrew Carnegie in his Gospel of Wealth, encouraged the rich to fund libraries, schools, and hospitals rather than merely pass wealth to descendants. Carnegie himself gave away the bulk of his fortune to educational and cultural institutions, arguing that dying rich was a disgrace. Others followed suit to varying degrees, sometimes motivated by genuine altruism, other times by a desire for social approval or legacy building. Philanthropy thus became both a moral obligation and a strategic tool in managing wealth, status, and public perception. Yet even as philanthropy spread, the excesses of the age remained impossible to ignore. Gilded Age mansions, some with dozens of bedrooms and imported European stonework, symbolized the sheer scale of wealth accumulation. These homes required dozens of servants and reflected an aspiration not just to comfort, but to immortality. In contrast, the tenement housing of the working class lacked running water or sanitation, underscoring the chasm between rich and poor. The juxtaposition of such extremes was not lost on the public or on reformers who began calling for systemic change. Journalists known as muckrakers exposed corruption and exploitation in both government and industry, while progressive-era reformers pushed for labor laws, antitrust legislation, and wealth taxes. The complexities of inheritance during this period cannot be separated from the larger questions of identity and belonging. Many Gilded Age families were recent arrivals in America or recent entrants into high society. Inheritance was thus not just about money, it was about securing a place in the social hierarchy, about transforming transient wealth into permanent status. This often involved elaborate efforts to construct family legacies, including the commissioning of biographies, portraits, and even architectural monuments. Estates became more than homes. They were symbols of dynastic ambition, meant to last for generations and anchor a family's name in the annals of American history. Yet, for all the careful planning, many Gilded Age fortunes did not survive beyond the third generation. Mismanagement, lavish spending, and changing economic conditions contributed to the erosion of wealth. The phrase shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations became a cautionary adage, warning of the difficulties in preserving inherited wealth. Moreover, as the 20th century advanced, the tax code became more aggressive toward large estates, and social attitudes toward wealth began to shift. The Great Depression in particular cast a long shadow over Gilded Age excesses, leading many to re-evaluate the values of the previous era. Despite this, the influence of the Gilded Age endures. The foundations established by families like the Rockefellers and Carnegies continue to support education, science, and the arts. Their names are etched into universities, concert halls, and medical institutions. Moreover, the structural changes they pioneered in corporate America, from monopolistic business practices to vertically integrated supply chains, still shape the economic landscape today. Inheritance, too, remains a powerful force in American society, influencing patterns of inequality, opportunity, and privilege. The Gilded Age was a time of breathtaking transformation, a moment when the old boundaries of wealth, class, and power were redefined. It was an age of both excess and opportunity, where ambition could yield vast rewards, but where those rewards brought new challenges in turn. The rise of new money families like the Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, and Astors showcased the potential of the American dream, but also highlighted its fragility. Inheritance added another layer to this story, weaving together law, emotion, and social pressure into a complex tapestry that continues to inform how Americans think about wealth, legacy, and the meaning of success. In the world of Gilded Age America, heiresses stood as both symbols of privilege and emblems of societal pressure. Their lives were lived under the glare of public fascination and behind the closed doors of tradition, expectation, and sometimes unhappiness. The contradictions in their roles were stark. They were celebrated as society darlings and fashion icons, yet tightly confined by the rigid structures of class, gender, and family duty. While the image of the American heiress sparkled with jewels and opulence, the reality of their lives was often one of careful restraint, preordained paths, and sacrifices cloaked in silk and lace. Heiresses became prominent figures in the emerging media culture of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Newspapers and magazines of the time were eager to report on their activities, wardrobes, social engagements, and romantic prospects. Their lives were dissected and curated for public consumption, painting them as aspirational figures whose wealth and beauty signified both national prosperity and personal grace. These women were expected to embody a complex mix of elegance, philanthropy, and refinement. Their appearances at balls, in carriages, and in portraits dressed by the leading fashion houses of Paris were not merely personal choices. They were performances that sustained the grandeur of their families and reinforced class distinctions. Their public image was carefully managed, often not by themselves but by their mothers or guardians, who saw marriage and reputation as the principal avenues through which the family's legacy would be extended. The heiress was expected to be beautiful, poised, well-mannered, and above all, useful in reinforcing the family's social standing. Her life was often structured around a calendar of social events: the debutante season, charity galas, garden parties, and summering in elite enclaves like Newport or the French Riviera. Her wardrobe was a signal of taste and wealth, her every move watched, her companions scrutinized, and her suitors weighed not only for charm but for bloodline and bank account. She was seen as a repository of cultural capital, expected to marry well, preserve appearances, and, once wed, continue the cycle through her own daughters. Beneath this glossy surface, however, many heiresses experienced deep personal conflicts. Despite their privileges, their autonomy was often extremely limited. Their lives were shaped from childhood by what was expected of them, with little room for deviation. Education for heiresses was not typically focused on intellectual development or career preparation but rather on social graces, etiquette, languages, and music skills designed to prepare them for high society rather than independence. They were raised to serve as extensions of their family's ambitions, often with little consideration for their own desires or abilities. Their futures were plotted well before they reached adulthood, and the pressure to marry not for love but for status was an enduring theme. Marriages among heiresses were frequently strategic, orchestrated to strengthen social alliances or elevate the family's status on the global stage. With American wealth surging and European aristocracies suffering financial decline, a pattern emerged in which rich American women married cash-strapped European nobles. These transatlantic unions gave American families a veneer of old-world respectability and provided the nobility with the funds needed to maintain their estates. Yet for the women involved, these marriages could be deeply unhappy. They often involved moving to foreign countries, adopting unfamiliar customs, and submitting to even more rigid social norms than those of their homeland. These unions were less fairy tales than transactions in which the heiress was the dowry. The life of Consuelo Vanderbilt is perhaps one of the most poignant examples of this tension. Born into one of America's wealthiest families, Consuelo was raised under the iron will of her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, who was determined to see her daughter marry into European nobility. Despite being in love with another man, Consuelo was coerced into marrying the Duke of Marlborough in 1895. The marriage was a classic example of the cash-for-title arrangement. While Consuelo became a duchess and entered the British aristocracy, the union was emotionally barren and deeply unhappy. Over time, she grew increasingly disillusioned with her situation and eventually separated from the Duke, later annulling the marriage and remarrying for love. Her life story, published in her memoir The Glitter and the Gold, revealed the loneliness and lack of agency she felt despite her status and fortune. Her mother, Alva Vanderbilt, presents another layer of complexity. Alva was a powerful figure in New York society and a master of social maneuvering. Determined to elevate the Vanderbilt name to the highest ranks of society, she used her daughter as a key pawn in that strategy. Yet Alva herself defied some expectations of her gender and class. After divorcing her husband, an almost unthinkable act at the time, she became a suffragist and public speaker, advocating for women's rights. Her transformation showed that the gilded cage of high society could be rattled, even if it couldn't be entirely escaped. Still, her push for women's advancement was marked by paradox. she imposed tremendous control over her daughter's choices while later promoting freedom for women in general. Anna Gould offers another compelling case. The daughter of Jay Gould, one of the era's most infamous railroad magnates, Anna inherited vast wealth and chose to marry into French aristocracy, first to Count Bonny de Castellane and later to Prince Hélie de Séguin. Her marriages were marred by scandal, debt and legal wrangling. Count Bonny was notorious for his extravagant spending of Anna's fortune, and their eventual divorce was a public spectacle. Anna's experience highlights the perils faced by heiresses who, while theoretically possessing great financial power, often had little control over how that wealth was used once they were married. Their money made them attractive but not powerful. These women's lives unfolded against a backdrop of broader societal change. The turn of the 20th century was a time of shifting roles for women. The suffrage movement was gaining momentum, and new educational and professional opportunities were beginning to emerge. Yet heiresses were often excluded from these developments, caught between the gilded expectations of the past and the uncertain freedoms of the future. They were not expected to work, and often they were discouraged from independent intellectual pursuits. While women of the middle and working classes began to enter new roles in offices, schools and reform movements, heiresses were kept within a narrow sphere of influence, allowed to fund charitable causes, perhaps, but rarely to lead them. Philanthropy became one of the few socially acceptable outlets for heiresses who sought purpose beyond the ballroom. Supporting hospitals, schools, and the arts allowed them to participate in public life while still conforming to gender norms. This form of engagement was often encouraged, not only because it softened the image of the idle rich but because it offered a way for heiresses to gain a form of influence without transgressing too far. In some cases, women turned these roles into platforms for broader activism, but they did so cautiously, balancing social expectations with personal convictions. The image of the charitable heiress helped to humanize the elite in the eyes of the public, particularly during times of economic tension. Despite their limitations, many heiresses cultivated personal strength and resilience. They developed subtle forms of resistance and negotiation, carving out space for their voices within restrictive frameworks. For some, this meant pursuing art, writing, or quiet forms of intellectual rebellion. For others, it meant redefining marriage and family life on their own terms, as Consuelo eventually did. These women were not merely passive figures, they navigated immense pressures and constructed lives of meaning within the confines they faced. The press and popular literature of the time often romanticized or mocked heiresses, portraying them as naive, spoiled, or tragically unfulfilled. Yet their real experiences were more textured. The weight of expectation, the lack of personal freedom, and the constant scrutiny shaped their development in profound ways. They lived lives of contradictions, surrounded by luxury but often lonely, celebrated publicly yet privately constrained. Their visibility made them role models, but the standards they were held to made genuine self-expression difficult. Many bore these burdens silently, while others used their platforms, however cautiously, to challenge the narratives imposed upon them. In time, the role of the heiress began to shift. The world wars, the depression, and the rise of feminism transformed society's view of wealth, gender, and power. Later generations of wealthy women began to enjoy greater educational opportunities and more freedom in shaping their lives. Still, the legacy of Gilded Age heiresses continues to resonate. Their stories offer insight into the ways wealth intersects with gender and identity, how privilege can coexist with pressure, and how the illusion of freedom can mask deeply rooted control. They remind us that even within gilded cages, human desires, dreams, and struggles persist. The lives of heiresses during this era cannot be summed up simply as tales of riches or repression. They were multifaceted individuals whose experiences reflected the broader cultural, social, and economic dynamics of their time. Their stories help us understand the complex layers beneath the surface of high society, revealing both the power and the limitations of privilege. Though adorned in luxury, many lived lives marked by restraint, caught between expectation and individuality, duty and desire, image and reality. Their legacies endure not just in the fashion or estates they left behind, but in the continuing dialogue about what it means to be free, to be seen, and to have a voice. In the landscape of American wealth during the Gilded Age and early 20th century, heiresses stood at a unique and often contradictory intersection of privilege and restriction. Born into wealth, many were expected to fulfill narrow roles centered around social appearances, strategic marriages, and the maintenance of family reputations. Yet, within this gilded framework, a number of remarkable women pushed against the boundaries of societal expectations, carving out lives that reflected their intellect, ambition, and moral conviction. Their stories reveal the broader evolution of women's roles during a period of enormous transformation in American society, one shaped by the struggle for suffrage, educational advancement, and the growing assertion of female agency. For most heiresses of the time, the script was simple and rigid. They were to be well-mannered, well-dressed, and eventually well-married. They were trained from a young age in etiquette, conversation, and domestic management, but not necessarily in critical thinking or leadership. Their identities were closely tied to the families from which they came and the ones they were expected to join through marriage. In many ways, they were living symbols of continuity, wealth preservation, and social cohesion. Yet this vision of womanhood, gilded though it may have been, did not satisfy the deeper aspirations of all women. As the social and political climate began to change, some heiresses found themselves questioning their roles, seeking education, autonomy, and the right to shape not only their destinies but the society around them. One of the most extraordinary examples of defiance and independence was Hetty Green, often dubbed the Witch of Wall Street. In a male-dominated world of finance, Hetty Green carved out a reputation as a shrewd investor and financier, growing her inheritance into one of the largest fortunes of her time. Born in 1834 into a wealthy Quaker family in Massachusetts, she showed a precocious interest in finance from a young age, reading financial reports and studying the stock market instead of indulging in the more traditional pastimes assigned to girls. When she inherited a significant sum from her father and aunt, she refused to hand over control to a male guardian as was customary. Instead, she managed her own portfolio, taking bold positions in railroads, real estate, and government bonds. Green's success in finance came at the cost of significant public scrutiny and often harsh criticism. She was caricatured in the press as miserly and eccentric, partly due to her refusal to conform to gender norms. Unlike other heiresses, she did not flaunt her wealth with grand houses or lavish parties. She dressed plainly, avoided socializing with high society, and lived frugally despite her riches. Her choices were interpreted as deviant and unbecoming of a woman of her status. Yet these very actions were, in essence, assertions of her agency. She refused to be defined by traditional femininity, or to rely on men for financial stewardship. Her life is a testament to the possibilities of female independence in a time when women were still denied many basic rights. Although Hetty Green stood largely outside the feminist movements of her time, other heiresses actively engaged in the political and social causes that were reshaping American life. As the women's suffrage movement gained momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many women of wealth began to lend their voices and resources to the cause. They funded campaigns, hosted meetings, and used their visibility to draw attention to the issue. These women recognized that while their wealth gave them a measure of security, it did not protect them from the systemic limitations imposed on their gender. The right to vote, to own property independently, to access education and employment, these were rights that even the wealthiest women often lacked. Clara Barton, while not born an heiress in the traditional sense, is another powerful example of a woman who shaped her own identity in defiance of expectations. Born in 1821 in Massachusetts, Barton trained as a teacher and later worked in the U.S. Patent Office, one of the first women to receive equal pay for equal work in a government position. Her most significant contribution came during the Civil War, where she served as a nurse on the front lines, providing medical care under dangerous and brutal conditions. After the war, she founded the American Red Cross, adapting the international model to meet the unique challenges of disaster relief in the United States. Though not part of the leisure class, Barton operated in circles influenced by wealth and power, and she relied on the support of philanthropists and social elites to build the Red Cross. Her career demonstrated the increasing permeability of social barriers and the ways in which women could transform charitable work into a platform for systemic change. While many heiresses were encouraged to support charity as a demonstration of feminine virtue, Barton's example revealed the potential for philanthropy to evolve into activism and institutional leadership. As the suffrage movement intensified in the early 20th century, numerous heiresses and daughters of the elite began to see activism not as a deviation from their roles, but as a fulfillment of them. With education expanding, many of these women had studied at emerging women's colleges such as Vassar, Bryn Mawr, and Smith. There they encountered new ideas about gender equality, political philosophy, and social responsibility. These intellectual foundations enabled them to become not just supporters of reform, but leaders in their own right. Women like Alva Vanderbilt, originally known for her social ambition and mastery of high society, eventually turned her considerable wealth and influence toward activism. After her divorce and her daughter's unhappy marriage to European nobility, Alva became a vocal supporter of the women's suffrage movement. She hosted rallies, gave speeches, and even founded the Political Equality League. Her transformation was emblematic of a broader shift among elite women from passive beneficiaries of wealth to active participants in the remaking of American society. Alva's involvement lent visibility and legitimacy to a movement that had often been dismissed or ridiculed by the male-dominated press and political establishment. This period also saw the emergence of heiresses who combined philanthropy with reform, using their fortunes to address root causes of inequality. Jane Addams, though not an heiress in the conventional sense, came from a wealthy family and used her resources to establish Hull House in Chicago. This settlement house provided education, childcare, and social services to immigrant families, becoming a national model for community-based reform. Addams' work bridged the gap between elite philanthropy and grassroots activism, demonstrating how wealth could be mobilized for transformative ends. Similarly, Lillian Wald, another woman of privilege, founded the Henry Street Settlement in New York, providing healthcare and social services to the poor. These women's efforts were part of a broader movement toward progressive-era reform, a response to the excesses of the Gilded Age. While their male counterparts often used wealth to entrench power, build monopolies, or fund political machines, these women used it to challenge injustice, uplift communities, and redefine the responsibilities of the elite. In doing so, they forged a new identity for heiresses not merely as stewards of wealth, but as agents of change. This shift did not come without resistance. Women who stepped into public life often faced criticism, both for stepping outside the domestic sphere and for questioning the status quo. Their wealth did not insulate them from misogyny or backlash. But they persisted, drawing strength from one another and from the movements they helped build. Through clubs, colleges, and advocacy groups, they created networks of support that enabled them to act more boldly than they might have alone. Organizations such as the National American Woman Suffrage Association and the Women's Trade Union League benefited enormously from the financial and strategic contributions of wealthy women. Over time, the legacy of these reform-minded heiresses began to influence how society viewed both women and wealth. Rather than being seen solely as ornamental or idle, heiresses increasingly became associated with civic responsibility and social leadership. Their philanthropic foundations, many of which continue to exist today, provided not only resources but models for how wealth could be used ethically and strategically. The idea that with great fortune came great responsibility began to take root, inspired in part by the example of these pioneering women. In the decades that followed, this legacy continued to evolve. The daughters and granddaughters of Gilded Age fortunes entered new spheres: journalism, politics, science, and the arts. They brought with them not just money, but a sense of purpose forged in the struggles of their predecessors. As women gained the right to vote, entered universities in larger numbers, and began to shape public discourse, the barriers that had once confined heiresses to social trivialities began to crumble. Yet the tension between wealth and independence, privilege and purpose, never disappeared entirely. Even today, the lives of wealthy women are often scrutinized through outdated lenses, their choices framed in terms of appearance, relationships, and consumption rather than achievement and influence. The fight for agency and identity that defined the lives of women like Hetty Green, Clara Barton, and Alva Vanderbilt was not only personal, it was foundational to the broader emancipation of women in America. They challenged the assumptions of their time, endured criticism, and built institutions that outlived them. Their contributions remind us that wealth does not automatically confer power, but that power can be claimed through vision, courage, and conviction. In resisting the scripts written for them, they wrote new ones for themselves and for the generations that followed. Their stories offer a lens through which we can understand the complex interplay between gender, class, and social change. They show that the pursuit of agency is not limited to the disenfranchised, but extends to anyone whose identity is constrained by expectation. In asserting their right to think, to act, and to lead, these heiresses helped to redefine what it meant to be a woman in America, not as a symbol of status, but as a force for progress. Their lives, often lived in the spotlight and under scrutiny, became laboratories for new ways of being. Their legacy, still unfolding, is one of courage, complexity, and transformation. The story of the Gilded Age heiresses is far more than a historical curiosity. It is a lens through which modern society continues to view wealth, gender, and power. The legacies of these women, once confined by strict social codes and narrow expectations, have expanded over time into something much larger. They represent the complexities of privilege and the possibilities of transformation. The age in which they lived, a period defined by extraordinary wealth and staggering inequality, laid the foundations for many of today's enduring debates about social responsibility, gender equity, and the ethical use of power. The Gilded Age, roughly spanning from the 1870s to the early 1900s, was a time of explosive economic growth in the United States. Industrial magnates and financiers amassed unprecedented fortunes, transforming America from a largely agrarian society into a global industrial power. With this rise in wealth came new social structures, norms, and expectations. The elite class created vast estates, sponsored the arts, and cultivated a culture of lavish display that defined the era. Yet, at the same time, millions of Americans lived in poverty, worked in dangerous factories, or struggled as recent immigrants to make a place for themselves in this new world. Heiresses stood at the center of this paradox. Born into families that had profited immensely from industrial capitalism, they became the public faces of their class, admired for their beauty, envied for their privilege, and criticized for their perceived idleness. But beneath the glittering exterior lay real human experiences: ambition, frustration, compassion, and resistance. The heiresses of the Gilded Age, whether they conformed to expectations or defied them, became pivotal figures in shaping the cultural and moral fabric of modern America. One of the most lasting influences of the Gilded Age heiresses is seen in the realm of philanthropy. In a society where women were largely excluded from formal political power, charitable giving became a way to assert influence and identity. Heiresses who had few legal or economic rights nevertheless controlled significant resources through family trusts or inheritances. They channeled this wealth into hospitals, schools, museums, libraries, and social services. Their contributions not only helped to alleviate suffering but also legitimized the role of women as civic leaders. Over time, this form of engagement laid the groundwork for modern nonprofit institutions and expanded the idea of what women could do in the public sphere. More than just writing checks, many of these women immersed themselves in the causes they supported. They engaged in social work, served on boards, and in some cases founded entire institutions. The model of the active philanthropist, someone who uses wealth to advance structural change, was significantly shaped by these heiresses. Today we see echoes of this legacy in figures like Melinda French Gates or Laurene Powell Jobs, who use their resources to advocate for global health, education, and social justice. These modern women stand on the shoulders of Gilded Age predecessors who dared to imagine that wealth could be a tool not only for luxury but for progress. Equally enduring is the narrative power of these heiresses' lives. Their stories continue to resonate not just because they were rich, but because they struggled with the same questions that people grapple with today. How do we define ourselves in the face of expectation? How do we make meaning within the structures we inherit? How do we balance personal freedom with social obligation? For many heiresses, the answers to these questions were hard-won. They faced intense scrutiny, were often denied autonomy, and lived within systems designed to silence or commodify them. And yet, many found ways to assert their agency, whether by pursuing education, choosing their own partners, supporting controversial causes, or simply by refusing to conform. The emotional and psychological terrain of their lives speaks to broader human experiences. Consuelo Vanderbilt's coerced marriage and eventual rebellion highlight the conflict between duty and desire. Hetty Green's financial independence and rejection of societal norms challenge assumptions about femininity and success. Alva Vanderbilt's transformation from social climber to suffragist exemplifies the possibility of personal growth and reinvention. These are not just tales of wealth and status, they are deeply human stories about navigating constraint and seeking purpose. These narratives remain relevant in today's conversations about gender, power, and identity. In a world where social media creates constant pressure to curate perfect lives, the heiresses' experiences of being watched, judged, and confined feel strikingly familiar. Their efforts to balance public image with private truth mirror the challenges faced by many modern women, especially those in the public eye. Their successes and failures offer insight into how individuals can use, resist, or redefine the roles assigned to them. Moreover, the Gilded Age itself casts a long shadow over modern society. Many of the economic patterns established during that era, concentration of wealth, corporate influence in politics, and rising inequality, have re-emerged in the 21st century. Today's new Gilded Age, marked by tech billionaires, global capital, and renewed debates about the social responsibilities of the wealthy, echoes the dilemmas faced over a century ago. As in the past, the question of how to use wealth wisely and ethically is at the forefront of public discourse. The example of heiresses who used their fortunes to support education, healthcare, and civil rights remains a powerful reminder that wealth can serve the public good if guided by values and vision. This brings us to the enduring question of legacy. What does it mean to inherit wealth and what obligations come with it? For many Gilded Age heiresses, legacy was a burden as much as a blessing. They were expected to carry on family traditions, protect reputations, and uphold a vision of elite femininity that often stifled their individuality. Yet the most influential among them redefined what legacy could mean. They did not merely preserve wealth, they redirected it. They challenged the notion that inheritance was only about property, suggesting instead that it could also be about responsibility, stewardship, and service. This redefinition continues to shape how we think about legacy today. Philanthropic foundations, educational endowments, and cultural institutions often bear the names of Gilded Age families, but they also reflect the values of the women who influenced their creation. These women understood that wealth, while powerful, is impermanent. What endures is the impact made on others, the lives improved, the ideas advanced, the injustices confronted. They shifted the narrative from personal glory to public good, setting a standard for future generations. At the same time, their stories also caution against the pitfalls of unchecked privilege. The lives of heiresses reveal the isolating effects of extreme wealth, the distortions of self that can come with constant adulation or control, and the ethical ambiguity of benefiting from systems that harm others. Many of these women were shielded from the worst injustices of their time, yet some made the effort to understand and address them. Their example suggests that true legacy lies not in comfort but in conscience, not in what is amassed, but in what is given and how. As society continues to grapple with inequality, environmental crisis, and global uncertainty, the question of how to navigate wealth and power responsibly has never been more urgent. The heiresses of the Gilded Age offer both inspiration and instruction. They show us that privilege does not have to result in passivity, that beauty and brilliance can coexist with boldness, and that history's constraints can be transformed into platforms for change. Their lives remind us that every generation faces the task of redefining what it means to lead, to give, and to be remembered. In literature, film, and popular culture, these women have become symbols of both glamour and grit. They continue to fascinate because they lived at the crossroads of competing ideals: tradition and transformation, luxury and labor, visibility and voicelessness. Through biographies, memoirs, and historical studies, their voices have been reclaimed, their struggles acknowledged, and their contributions honored. This ongoing interest is not merely nostalgic, it reflects a deep need to understand how individuals navigate systems of power and create meaning within them. Ultimately, the enduring impact of the heiresses lies not in the mansions they built or the titles they acquired, but in the ways they expanded the possibilities of womanhood and citizenship. They challenged narrow roles, demanded inclusion, and insisted on relevance in a world that often tried to render them decorative or silent. In doing so, they left behind a legacy that is both deeply personal and profoundly political. Their stories are not just chapters in a gilded past, they are blueprints for a more just and generous future. In the 21st century, the stories of Gilded Age heiresses remain strikingly relevant. These women, born into immense privilege during a time of great economic inequality and rigid social structures, navigated a complex web of expectations, restrictions, and opportunities. Today, their experiences echo in the ongoing conversations about wealth inequality, gender dynamics, and the ethical responsibilities of those who hold influence. While the cultural context has evolved, the core issues remain familiar. The contemporary world is marked by unprecedented technological advancements, new platforms of influence, and a reawakened global awareness of systemic injustice. Against this backdrop, the lives of heiresses serve not only as historical case studies but as sources of reflection, warning, and inspiration for modern society. The Gilded Age, named for its glittering surface and hidden corruption, was a time of vast disparity between the rich and the poor. Industrialists and financiers accumulated extraordinary fortunes, while laborers, immigrants, and marginalized groups struggled to survive. In this environment, heiresses were often seen as the visible avatars of inherited privilege. They wore dazzling gowns, attended balls, graced the pages of society columns, and married into foreign nobility. Yet many also lived under severe restrictions. Their choices were often dictated by family interests, and their voices muted by gender expectations. Still, some managed to break through those constraints, using their wealth and platforms to challenge norms and advocate for change. Fast forward to the 21st century and a similar wealth gap persists. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, the growing power of corporations, and the increasing influence of inherited money raise questions about the responsibilities of the elite. Today's billionaires, many of whom come from or are creating new dynasties, are scrutinized not just for how they earn their wealth, but for how they use it. Social media has transformed how influence operates, offering both opportunities and risks. Celebrity, once the domain of society pages, is now curated across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Public figures, whether born into wealth or self-made, are expected to engage with issues such as climate change, racial justice, and gender equality. Yet the performative aspects of these engagements often blur the lines between genuine activism and brand management. In this environment, the stories of heiresses offer valuable insight. They illuminate how privilege can be both a constraint and a catalyst. For example, women like Alva Vanderbilt and Consuelo Vanderbilt began as icons of wealth and beauty but evolved into advocates for women's rights and social reform. Their transformation was not easy. It involved personal sacrifice, public criticism, and deep reflection. Their journeys show that it is possible to leverage privilege for good, but that doing so requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to disrupt one's own comfort. Similarly, today's heirs and heiresses face a pivotal question. Will they perpetuate the structures that benefit them, or will they use their platforms to dismantle injustice? This is not a simple moral decision. It involves complex negotiations of identity, loyalty, and public expectation. The heiresses of the past demonstrate that meaningful change is not merely a matter of writing checks or attending galas. It demands sustained engagement, a willingness to challenge the status quo, and a recognition of the systems that sustain inequality. The modern heiress, whether she is an actual inheritor of wealth or a metaphorical heiress to cultural power, exists in a world where influence is amplified by digital tools. Social media has democratized visibility, allowing individuals from diverse backgrounds to shape narratives, mobilize movements, and hold the powerful accountable. At the same time, it has created a new kind of pressure to appear engaged, to present a curated version of activism, and to perform empathy rather than live it. The spectacle of philanthropy can sometimes eclipse its substance. Instagram posts about charity galas or viral videos of good deeds can generate admiration without addressing structural problems. This tension between visibility and authenticity echoes the challenges faced by Gilded Age heiresses, who were often reduced to their public personas. They were expected to look a certain way, behave a certain way, and avoid scandal at all costs. Today's influencers, celebrities, and wealthy figures face their own version of these expectations. But unlike their predecessors, they also face instant feedback from millions of followers. This can foster a sense of accountability, but it can also lead to superficiality and virtue signaling. To counter this, we must return to the lessons embedded in the lives of historical heiresses who pursued deeper forms of engagement. Hetty Green, for example, defied gender norms by becoming one of the most successful investors of her time. Clara Barton, though not a conventional heiress, leveraged her position and support networks to revolutionize disaster relief through the American Red Cross. These women made long-term commitments to causes they believed in. They did not rely on image alone. They worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often at great personal cost. Today, true social responsibility must be rooted in action, not optics. This involves asking hard questions. What systems allow wealth to accumulate and persist? Who is excluded from these systems? How can those with privilege participate in reshaping them? The answers are not always comfortable, but they are necessary. Philanthropy must be accompanied by policy change. Representation must be matched with redistribution. Awareness must lead to accountability. Moreover, the legacy of heiresses teaches us the importance of intergenerational thinking. Many of the institutions they founded, libraries, schools, hospitals, continue to serve communities today. They invested not just in moments but in futures. This kind of legacy requires a shift from self-promotion to sustainability. It demands that we think beyond individual success and toward collective well-being. In this context, the concept of legacy itself must be re-examined. For the Gilded Age heiresses, legacy often meant preserving a family name, securing a noble title, or maintaining a fortune. Over time, some expanded this definition to include social impact, educational access, and community health. Today we must push this evolution even further. Legacy should not be measured solely in wealth or fame, but in justice, opportunity, and healing. What will we leave behind, not just in terms of material resources, but in terms of culture, values, and structures? This call to action extends beyond the wealthy. While heiresses serve as a potent symbol, their stories resonate with anyone who holds some form of privilege, whether through race, class, education, or nationality. The question is not simply what do you have, but what are you doing with what you have? Every individual has the potential to influence their environment. The heiresses of the past remind us that even within systems designed to confine, there is room to move, to resist, and to create. Education plays a crucial role in this transformation. By teaching the histories of these women not as footnotes, but as central figures, we challenge the narrative that power always lies with men or that wealth automatically equates to indifference. We introduce young people to the complexity of social roles and encourage them to think critically about agency, ethics, and engagement. These stories can inspire a generation not just to succeed but to serve. Contemporary movements for justice such as #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, and climate activism are driven by this same spirit of agency and accountability. They are led by individuals who refuse to accept inherited systems of harm. In this way, they mirror the rebellious energy of heiresses who challenge their own elite circles. By studying those women, we can find parallels, guidance, and strength. Their triumphs and failures become part of a shared roadmap for navigating privilege in pursuit of a more equitable world. The relevance of heiresses' stories in the 21st century lies in their layered humanity. They were not flawless heroes or villains. They were complicated people who made choices in complex times. Some used their wealth to reinforce exclusion. Others fought to expand inclusion. Some conformed, others resisted. This nuance is essential. It reminds us that change is often incremental, that progress is never guaranteed, and that even small acts of defiance can ripple outward. Their lives invite us to look more closely at our own. Where do we have power and how do we use it? What expectations shape our decisions and how can we challenge them? How can we, like those pioneering women, transform constraint into creativity and privilege into purpose? As we face the challenges of our own era, from global inequality to ecological collapse, the need for vision, courage, and compassion has never been greater. The heiresses of the Gilded Age offer more than just history. They offer a mirror and a challenge. They show us that legacy is not something we inherit, it is something we build. And the future, like the past, will be shaped by the choices we make today. The lives and legacies of Gilded Age heiresses are more than stories of opulence, ballrooms, and designer gowns. They are intricate narratives woven into the broader fabric of American social, economic, and cultural history. As we have explored their public roles, private struggles, and the transformative paths some of them chose, it becomes clear that these women left behind more than mansions and dynasties. They left behind moral and civic questions that remain urgent today, questions about power, purpose, and the responsibilities of privilege. In many ways, the heiresses of the Gilded Age were trapped in gilded cages. They were raised in homes of unimaginable wealth but confined by strict social codes, family expectations, and the narrow roles available to women of their class. Their lives were shaped by the tensions between tradition and modernity, personal ambition and social duty, visibility and voicelessness. Yet within these constraints, many heiresses carved out spaces for autonomy, influence, and meaningful legacy. They transformed the tools at their disposal, money, access, and public attention, into platforms for action. And in doing so, they helped lay the foundation for modern philanthropy, women's rights, and civic engagement. What makes their stories compelling today is how much they still reflect the world we live in. While the surface of society has changed, horse-drawn carriages have become private jets, society columns have morphed into Instagram feeds, the core structures of privilege, inequality, and gendered expectations remain stubbornly persistent. The United States is once again in an era defined by wealth concentration, political polarization, and debates over what constitutes meaningful progress. In this context, the example of the Gilded Age heiresses offers both guidance and caution. One of the clearest parallels lies in the role of inherited wealth. In the Gilded Age, industrial fortunes created new aristocracies in a supposedly classless society. Heiresses were expected to preserve and expand this wealth through strategic marriages and careful social positioning. Today, inherited wealth continues to shape economic opportunities and political influence. From real estate empires to tech dynasties, intergenerational privilege is a defining force in American life. The challenges that once faced the Vanderbilts, Astors, and Goulds now confront a new class of heirs and heiresses. How to manage immense wealth responsibly in a world that is increasingly aware of injustice and inequality. Modern heiresses, whether literal or metaphorical, must navigate a complex moral landscape. The philanthropic model pioneered by earlier generations remains, but it is under greater scrutiny. Social media has amplified calls for transparency, accountability, and systemic change. Simply donating money is no longer enough. People want to see action that dismantles the very systems that create inequality. The Gilded Age heiresses who moved beyond performance and engaged deeply with social issues provide a template for this kind of commitment. Their stories remind us that wealth must be a means, not an end, a resource for transformation, not just self-indulgence. Another lesson from their lives is the enduring importance of identity and agency. Many heiresses were denied the right to choose their own paths. Marriages were arranged, careers discouraged, and independence subtly or overtly undermined. Yet within these limitations some found ways to assert themselves. Whether through the pursuit of education, involvement in reform movements, or quiet resistance to family expectations, they redefined what it meant to be a woman of privilege. Their resilience speaks to the broader struggle for gender equality, one that continues to this day. The 21st century has brought immense progress in women's rights, yet the burdens of appearance, perfection, and conformity still weigh heavily, especially on women in the public eye. Social media platforms have become stages for performative femininity, just as society balls once were. Today's influencers, celebrities, and wealthy women are constantly judged, often harshly, for how they look, what they say, and whether they are doing enough. The heiresses of the past navigated similar terrain. Their experiences remind us that the struggle for authentic selfhood in the face of public expectation is not new, and that it often takes courage to choose integrity over image. This leads us to another crucial point: the power of storytelling. The reason we remember women like Consuelo Vanderbilt, Alva Belmont, and Hetty Green is not just because they were wealthy, it is because they lived lives that defied simple categorization. They were flawed, ambitious, brave, and sometimes contradictory. Their legacies endure because people have told and retold their stories in ways that resonate with new generations. In a world where narratives are currency, this is a powerful reminder that how we remember the past shapes the future. Educators, historians, and artists have a role to play here. By elevating the voices and experiences of women who have historically been sidelined even when they were wealthy, we gain a fuller understanding of history. We learn that power is not always about holding office or leading armies. It is also about influencing culture, shaping values, and investing in the long game of social change. Heiresses, in this light, become more than symbols of decadence. They become case studies in the uses and misuses of power. So, what does this all mean for us now? It means recognizing that privilege carries obligations. It means understanding that legacy is not only what we inherit, but what we create. It means challenging ourselves to look beyond appearances and ask deeper questions about justice, inclusion, and impact. The Gilded Age heiresses lived in a time of moral ambiguity, and so do we. Their choices were not always easy or clear-cut, and ours won't be either. But their lives show that even within rigid systems, change is possible. The call to action, then, is not just for the rich or famous, it is for everyone. Whether we inherit wealth, influence, education, or freedom, we all have something to offer. We can use our resources to amplify marginalized voices, to support policies that promote equity, to invest in sustainable futures. We can redefine success not as accumulation but as contribution. We can ask ourselves the same questions that shaped the best of the heiresses. What kind of world are we building? Who are we leaving behind? What do we want to be remembered for? The heiresses of the Gilded Age were products of their time, but they were also, in many cases, ahead of it. They lived through rapid change and responded with vision and conviction. Their stories remind us that while history may not repeat itself, it often rhymes. We too live in an age of extremes, of wealth and want, of progress and peril. Like them, we must decide whether to retreat into comfort or step forward into purpose. Their enduring impact lies not just in their names or fortunes, but in their evolution. They show us that transformation is always possible, that identity is not fixed, and that privilege, when combined with principle, can be a force for extraordinary good. As we look to the future, let us draw from their lives the strength to imagine, the courage to act, and the wisdom to leave behind something better than we found.